Hi everyone, I'm Sudeshna Gupta, and today I'll be speaking to you about a brief history of natural history. Humans have evolved in an extremely complex world, both in terms of biological diversity and experience. Much of our effort goes into making this world more predictable, eliminating the unknown. And in that process, we come across the natural world. Now, before we jump into the book, here is a small quote. We are all born natural historians. What happens next is up to chance, environment, and the circumstances of our particular narrative. John T. Anderson. This is the author of the book. Now, we'll begin this entire book discussion. Before that, there is this one line which I want you to think about. Natural history, inquiry and observation into the natural world, is the building block of all sciences. Now, there is this interesting hypothesis called the biophilia hypothesis. According to the biophilia hypothesis, the connection with nature that we feel is beneficial to all humans through a dominant genetic and evolutionary basis. One possible explanation of this hypothesis would be that our ancestors who had a stronger connection to nature had a greater evolutionary advantage than those who did not. Um, since they had better knowledge and therefore greater access to food, water, and shelter. So let's come to the book Deep Things Out of Darkness. This book is a resurrection of people and stories from the past that set the stage for modern ecological understanding. It's written exclusively from an European Anglo American perspective, so you will see most of the examples from there. While going through the book, it's important to understand how the perception of natural history has changed over time. So, what has changed throughout history? A 19th or a mid 20th century zoologist was seldom found without a gun. For a 21st century zoologist or a conservationist, this will be an alien concept. The only things that we can shoot are our cameras. So, during the journey of the beagle, Darwin took along with him a painter and a gun, and he shot and stuffed or pickled as many specimens as he could. So, scientists who eat plants and animals, they follow the tradition of Charles Darwin. During the voyage, he ate puma, iguanas, giant tortoises, armadillos. He even accidentally ate a part of a bird called Lacertia after spending months trying to catch it so that he could describe the species. So it was only after eating the species he felt like he could describe all those species. I'll end this with one line. It takes guts to be a scientist. A stronger stomach does not hurt either. Survival required the development of detailed knowledge about the habitats of the game species. In this sense, natural history is very old. It may be one of the oldest of our sciences. People learned to read the environment long before they learned to read the printed pages, clouds, and seas, and the ways of animals and plants and seasons are not just interesting external phenomena, but it was essential for their everyday life. Testing. Foraging processing required very intricate knowledge of the natural world. As we transition towards a sedentary lifestyle, the practical natural history of early hunters and gatherers morphed over time what we call today as agroecology. Testing. So let's traverse through time and come to a civilization in the Middle East. So the Assyrian rulers assembled hunting parks and paradises that connected selection of plants and animals from throughout the empire and provided the opportunity to study about the animals in a more or less natural setting. These are the ones that gave rise to the stories of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. Among these Assyrian rulers, there was a king called Assur Banipal. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. So he was there from 1668 to 1626 BC, and as and is considered probably the potential founding father of natural history. Testing. Amongst his treasures is a book called the Epic of Gilgamesh. Epic of Gilgamesh perhaps is now the oldest book available, uh, where for the first time there was evidence of systematic ordering of the natural objects in context of trade, commerce, and medicine, and had extensive herbal descriptions uh, of over 100 medicinal plants. Finally, with time, the Assyrian dynasty declined, and after several centuries, we come to Aristotle. Aristotle was the Greek philosopher who pioneered natural history on Lesbos. One of his pioneering work was the history of animals. He stressed on empirical observations, rejecting simplistic divine explanations like why did this happen just because God intended it to be. The History of Animals book had a powerful influence on zoology for some 2000 years. In this book, he had made very accurate eyewitness observations, particularly about marine biology, such as the octopus had color changing abilities and a spur transferring tentacle, the young dogfish that grows inside the mother's body, and also a male river catfish that guards the egg after the female has left. Some of these were long considered fanciful before being rediscovered in the 19th century. Let us come to the Roman Empire now. The greatest Roman naturalist, Pliny the Elder. So, Pliny had a very interesting habit. He insisted that he wanted to be carried on a chair around Rome if he had to travel also, so that he does not lose any time that could be applied to studying. Pliny did not do much of personal observations. He was called as the great compiler, and with all his compiling talent, he built the first known encyclopedia on natural history called Naturalis Historia or Natural History. His list included animals that were both real creatures and mythical beasts, like that of the phoenix. Dioscorides was a field surgeon of the Roman era. With his extensive knowledge about the medicinal plants, he wrote about a book called De Materia Medica. It had about 500 species of plants and lists of thousands of treatments for different diseases on that. And the emphasis of the book was on species identification. The Great Library of Alexandria in Alexandria, Egypt, was one of the largest and most significant libraries of the world. The loss of the library at Alexandria led to extinction of anything resembling organized natural history in the Western world. During the Dark Age, there was no real advancement in sciences and humanities. A notable European scholar at that time was a monk named Rabanus, and Rabanus had this concept there that was popular at that time and later on rejected obviously. It was called Scala Naturae. Scala Naturae is a Bible based concept, also called as a ladder of life. The idea is that all living beings can be viewed as representing various degrees of perfectness, with human beings at the top of the biological hierarchy. So, human beings were considered the perfect ones, and all the other living species were trying to achieve that perfectness. So, natural history was looking for a hero after the death of Pliny, and this came up to be Frederick, the Holy Roman Emperor. He was born in troubled times when there was a lot of establishment problem with church and other things. But one of the most interesting work of his is De Arti Venandi cum Avibus. I don't know how do you pronounce that properly, but it means that the art of hunting with birds. Unlike most monarchs, Frederick was unwilling to simply be a patron of science. He wanted to make his own contribution as well. So, in this book, you will see that Frederick is fascinated with incubation. His experiments with placing eggs from various variety of birds under chicken or simply exposing them to sunlight. He considers the problems of migration. He explores feather structure, internal anatomy, gross morphology. Testing. After his extensive writings on the biology of birds, he moves on to how to utilize birds for hunting. So he talks about training the falcon, identifying and capture a suitable bird species for hunting, and that's how this book continues. So the Arti Venandi was a gigantic leap towards scientific research, like a springboard for original research. During the medieval period, the interface between natural history and magic was very prominent, and there was a very overlap between astrology, alchemy, theology, mathematics, and all of them were in overlap during that period. So the medical practitioners had to be able to identify certain plants or even parts of the plants so that they can be used for cures. The information on animal anatomy was also important. So, in this context, medicine and natural history were closely intertwined. As medicine developed, this led to production of large number of herbals that contained a mixture of botanical and zoological information. And in some cases, they also included some ecological information on range and even behavior of the organisms. So, Columbus and his successors' voyages around the world led to observation of various new forms. There was a fast development in science and engineering, and the reliance on ancient knowledge was reducing. Another interesting thing at that time was the printing press. So, when the printing press came in, there were some amazing books being published with great illustrations. So by the end of 15th century, the Europeans had realized that the world was much larger than their studies of Greek and Romantics. In 1492, Columbus set off for his first attempt to find a short sea route to Asia, and the next 100 years have been called as the era of the discovery of the sea, age of exploration. The ecological impacts of the European discovery of America and the subsequent development of circumglobal trade and movement were enormous. So in one of the work it was described as this: the seams of Pangaea were closing down, drawn together by the sailmaker's needle. Chickens met cuis, cattle met kangaroo, Irish met potatoes, Comanches met horses, Incas met smallpox, all for the first time. So in the 16th century, there was an explosion of production of herbals and other books addressing various aspects of natural history. This was a clear evidence about the decline in superstition of the previous centuries and the rise of a truly global perspective in botany. The Herbal or the General Historia of Plantae, gathered by John Gherardi of London in 1597, was a very important book in a number of ways. Firstly, it was widely published, distributed, and used as a model, and it provides a clear evidence of the rise of a truly global perspective in botany. Testing. So, I'll give you a trivia example of Harry Potter. I don't know how many of you are fans of it, but I am. So, in Professor Sprout's class, she used to teach the students of herbology about how to pick up the mandrake plant, remember? And the mandrake plant was like a human baby who would scream and shout, and it had very powerful restorative properties that were later on used to revive all those people who had become statues when they saw the snake. So Gerard in his 1597 book of Herbal mentions about this plant mandrake, and he outrightly rejects this old wives' tale of the human baby-like structure of the plant. He insists that he has himself digged up the plants and replanted them many times, and assures that the plant does not look like humans. So this was one of those where he was breaking all the myths that were accumulating for so many years. However, in the third volume, he gets little ahead of himself and he writes about something that he has not actually seen. So there was this story of barnacle goose, and the strange story is that has been discussed by multiple authors, and the story was that there was this marvelous tree in India that produced a fruit that hatched into birds, or at least bird-like creatures. Gerard believed that the barnacles that are found on driftwood of the east coast of Scotland and Ireland must have come from a similar tree, and when they hatch, great flocks of wintering geese or the barnacle geese are formed. So, this was one story where he got himself in trouble. So, gradually, the Spanish explorers also discovered newer worlds, and with the growing internationalization of science, a more systematic approach was needed. And this came after several years as a new order. In the first decade of the new century, there was this immense growth of science. Science and magic had forever parted ways. Isaac Newton had published his Principia. And one particular importance in this for modern science was that the increasing freedom to travel and communicate. In spite of wars, revolution, plague, natural historians found it very easy to communicate and move about and experience broad range of climates, species, and also send letters across to each other to their fellow researchers across the world. In 1660, the Royal Society's motto was nullis in verba, or take nobody's word for it. So there was this growing emphasis on experimentation over reliance on authority. The boundaries began to fade between cosmic and microscopic research. There was Galileo looking at the stars above, and also there was Robert Hooke, who had recently published his Micrographia using the microscopes. The large number of new organisms that were being discovered needed a more universal way of naming them. It required the real science of taxonomy. Traditionally, the concept of taxonomy is credited to Linnaeus, but a lot of people had their impact in that creation. So, there was this prominent natural historian called John Ray. John Ray's greatest contribution to natural history was his development of a hierarchical taxonomy. He rejected all of the previous ways of classification and suggested that the only true method of organization should use the actual structure and form of a plant, and that should be the basis of splitting them up or clumping together. This publications of Ray's and his friend significantly altered the landscape of taxonomy. Carolus Linnaeus. So I'm sure this is one person all of you are very well aware of. We have been reading about him since class 6 or 7. And Linnaeus was born 2 years after Ray's death. And his interest in botany was from a very young age. He preferred to be in the woods collecting plants and observing plants rather than reading any books. The life history of Carolus Linnaeus is very interesting. You can read about it in your free time, about how he received royal patronage, how his wife supported him in his studies, and how he became Carl von Linné. So, the Linnean system of classification is important because it led to the use of binomial nomenclature that we use today to identify its species. So, the Linnean system saw nature in three kingdoms. Is it an animal? Is it a vegetable? Is it a mineral? The minerals lack life and sensibility. The vegetables are alive but lack sensation. The animals have both life and sensation and are able to move at least to some point in their life. So in 1735, Linnaeus published his book Systema Naturae, which contained his taxonomy for organizing the natural world. And gradually, he came to be known as the father of modern taxonomy. So before we go to binomial nomenclature, let's talk a little bit about Linnean classification. The Linnean classification is artificial and natural. Artificial for the higher orders of kingdom, class, and orders, and natural for the species and genus level. So, what it means is that in the higher orders, they are grouped together based on the convenience of the observer. But in case of the species and genera level groupings, they are grouped together based on their biological connections. There were six classes in the Linnean system: mammals, birds, amphibia, insects, fishes, and worms. Gradually, with time, with further authors who came into the picture, they rejected this classification of worms, and it was left with five classes. The most lasting thing about Linnaeus taxonomy was the insistence on Latinized binomial for every species. So, this is what has been used even today in the binomial system of nomenclature. Testing. The binomial nomenclature today provides a standardized and universal way of naming species. It helps to avoid confusion that may arise from using common names. I'm sure you're aware of the rules of binomial nomenclature. There's something we have been learning since our school. So, there are these two important codes that is followed while naming any species. One is the International Code of Zoological Nomenclature, and the second is the International Code of Nomenclature for Algae, Fungi, and Plants. It was earlier called as the International Code of Botanical Nomenclature, but in 2011 or so, the name was changed to International Code of Nomenclature for Algae, Fungi, and Plants. Whenever you have time, go through the code and also check out this website called Zoo Bank. It is the official registry for zoological nomenclature. Testing. So let's go back in time to 1700 and 1900. And this was the age of naturalist explorers who took it upon themselves to go and see the world and study the expanding natural world. By 1700 to 1900, some remarkable work was done by these naturalists who mapped and catalogued and explained the expanding natural world. Some of these naturalists you might be aware of, and this is how we are coming to the story of Darwin. So by 1840s, there was this growing sense of specialization within natural history. The naturalists were increasingly identifying themselves by the group of organisms they were studying. So they were lepidopterists, ornithologists, and everybody was trying to have a niche specialization, unlike the earlier natural historians who had a specialization in everything. So the pictures that you see here are the observations of a author and a passionate lepidopterist, Vladimir Nabokov. In his famous words, literature and butterflies are the two sweetest passions known to man. His scientific drawings on watercolors of butterflies have been compiled together in a book called Fine Lines. So I give this example to you because of an interesting quality of a natural history is that the ability to detect pattern in nature. That is the one that you can see beyond your naked eye. Valdemar, during his observations of the butterfly, made a particular specific hypothesis about the blue butterflies. He suggested that he proposed at the time that this particular species of blue butterfly had spread from America to Asia. And at the time, it was a very novel idea based on only his morphological analysis that he had done. Testing, testing. The entire scientific community had disbelieved him at that time. But in 2011, when the DNA samples of these butterflies were studied, his theory was confirmed. Every exhaustive DNA study confirmed his simple morphological observations. So, there you see the power of curiosity and critical observations. For the remaining chapters of the book, I am not going to walk you through. This is something which I want you to read on your own, leisurely, at your own time. Don't bother reading them before exams. Take your time after December, after exams are over. In the following chapters, you will read about the natural historians' names whom you are well aware of. You will read about Darwin, Wilson, and how it has evolved to its current stage. So, considering curiosity and interest are the hallmarks of a good naturalist, I am leaving these chapters to you. In the recent decade, there has been a slow death and resurrection of the natural history. The decline of natural history can be attributed to several factors, although it's important to note that the extent of this decline is different across different regions. Testing, testing. Some of the key factors for this decline will be specialization in science. Over time, there is a trend towards increased specialization in scientific disciplines. Natural history traditionally encompassed a wide range of topics from botany, zoology, geology, ecology. As scientific knowledge expanded, there was a shift towards more specialized and focused research. Another point is technological advancement. With the advancement of technologies and tools, it allowed researchers to go more specific into molecular biology, genetics, and other advanced techniques. And as a result, there was a decreased emphasis on traditional observation and descriptive methods of natural history. The third point, which is very important, is funding. Without funding, you cannot carry out your studies, right? And since with natural history, um, it does not really yield always very tangible outcomes or solutions. And as a result, the funding for these study is very difficult. I had read it somewhere that Darwin couldn't have been Darwin, or any of the earlier natural historians couldn't have been so famous until and unless they had the leisure of time and funds at their disposal. The change in public interest. There is a decreased interest among today's generation towards going outdoors in nature, and this gradually has an impact on the overall engagement in natural historical studies. While several of these factors have contributed to decline of natural history studies over the last decade, there has been a growing recognition for the importance of the study. Climate change and all these factors that is of concern today. So there has been a call for revival. there has been a growing recognition of the importance of this integrative and interdisciplinary approach in science. Some researchers are advocating for a revival of natural history study as they offer a holistic understanding of the natural world, which is very valuable for conservation of species, habitat, and the natural world. And as for the educational interests, the education pendulum may be swinging back in favor of natural history. So, this was a brief history of the natural history. I have shown you a snippet of the story, and I hope that you can read the next story on your own. As for your exams, this chapter or my portion about natural history is about observations. So, the question pattern in the exams will be about observations and how you analyze a particular situation. Here are two things that I want you to think on. The first is, how do you enhance your natural history observations in the digital age? Second point is, we have studied about natural history, right, for all these for the last 25 minutes. So, natural history, inquiry, and observation into the natural world is a building block of all sciences. This is the second point I want you to think on. Please don't bother about by hearting any dates and names of this presentation. If you're a good observer, you will be able to answer these questions. Okay, so all the best. Let me know if you have any questions further. Bye.